You did not choose your last relationship. You did not choose your job. You did not even choose to click on this video. Something older than you, something that has been running the show since before you had a name, made that decision and then handed you the receipt and told you to sign it. And you did. You always do. Because your brain would rather lie to you every single day than admit, even once, that most of your life happens to you, not because of you. And that's before we even get to why. Here's the uncomfortable part. This isn't about luck or fate or whatever term makes losing feel less personal. This is about a switch in your head that flips on automatically every single day, convincing you that you're steering a car that most of the time has no steering wheel at all. Psychologists have a name for it. You've never heard the name, but you felt it. Every time you blew on dice before a roll you knew was random, every time you picked your own lottery numbers instead of letting the machine choose for you, every time you refreshed an app for the 40th time, convinced this refresh, unlike the other 39, would be the one that mattered. The question isn't whether you do this, you do. The question is what it's costing you, and, this is the part that gets uncomfortable, what happens to the people who stop. In 1975, a psychologist named Ellen Langer walked into an office building with a stack of cards. Football players printed on the front, a $sign on the back. She told the workers inside it was a lottery, $1 a ticket, and whoever held the winning card at the end of the week would take the pot. It sounds like a footnote. It became one of the most cited papers in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Half the workers were handed a card at random. No say in the matter, no ceremony, just here's your number. Thanks for the dollar. The other half got to choose. They flipped through the deck, considered their options like they were picking a horse at the track, and picked the card that felt right. Same odds, same random draw at the end of the week, same exact chance of winning nothing, which, statistically, is what almost all of them were about to do. Then, a few days before the draw, Langer's team went back to every single participant with the same offer. Sell us your ticket back. Name your price. The people who'd been handed a random card sold it back cheap, almost without thinking. It was just a piece of cardboard to them, because that's what it was. The people who chose their own card did something strange. They wanted more money, a lot more. Not because their card had a better chance, it didn't, mathematically it was identical, but because somewhere between flipping through that deck and picking their favorite, their brain had quietly reclassified a coin flip as a skill. They'd stopped treating it like luck, and started treating it like something they'd earned. Notice what that detail actually means, because it's not small. These weren't gullible people. They were office workers on a lunch break who understood perfectly well how a lottery works, and they still, every one of them, let the simple act of choosing convince them that choosing had done something. Langer ran versions of this with dice too. People bet more money on their throw before they threw the dice than after, and more when they were allowed to throw the dice themselves instead of watching someone else throw for them. The moment control became passive, even in a game that was never anything but chance. Their confidence collapsed. She tested other variables too, and each one nudged the illusion higher. Give someone a lottery ticket with familiar symbols on it instead of unfamiliar ones, and their confidence rises, even though a familiar symbol has never once influenced a random draw. Pit someone against a nervous, fumbling competitor instead of a calm, confident one, and they'll rate their own odds of winning higher, in a game of pure chance where the other person's composure is mathematically irrelevant. None of these variables, choice, familiarity, competition, involvement, actually move the odds. All four of them reliably moved how safe people felt. Here's the twist nobody puts in the textbook summary. This wasn't a flaw in a few anxious gamblers. Langer ran 6 separate studies on hundreds of people and got some version of the same result almost every time. This isn't a bug that shows up in weak moments. It's the standard factory setting. So why does picking a card make your brain lie to you about math? It technically understands. Because your brain was never built to calculate probability. It was built to keep you alive long enough to make more brains. And for that job, maybe I have some control here, beat I have zero control and there's nothing I can do almost every single time. Picture the version of you that existed 100,000 years ago, standing in tall grass, hearing a rustle. There are two ways to be wrong here. You can think there's a predator in the grass when there isn't, which costs you a few wasted seconds of adrenaline. Or you can think there's nothing there when there actually is, which costs you your life and every future descendant you were ever going to have. Evolution did the math for you, and the math says assume agency. Assume something is happening for a reason. Assume you can act on it, even when you can't. A false alarm is cheap. A missed threat is final. Your brain kept the setting that erred toward, I can do something about this, because the ancestors who defaulted to helplessness generally didn't get the chance to pass that trait down. Fast forward to now, and that same wiring can't tell the difference between a predator in the grass and a green light in a lab. In 1966, a psychologist named Julian Rotter published research in psychological monographs on what he called locus of control. Whether people believe outcomes in their life come from their own actions or from outside forces they can't touch. Most people don't sit at either extreme, but almost everyone leans toward believing they have more internal control than the evidence supports, and that lean isn't random. It's load-bearing. It's the thing holding up your ability to get out of bed and try again tomorrow. And there's a dark mirror to all of this that shows exactly how expensive the opposite belief can get. In the late 1960s, researchers running conditioning experiments discovered something they didn't expect. When a person or animal is repeatedly exposed to an outcome they truly cannot influence, no matter what they try, they eventually stop trying. Even after the situation changes, an escape becomes possible. Psychologists call it learned helplessness, and it isn't just an old lab finding. It shows up in people who've been through prolonged failure or chronic setbacks, where the accurate belief, nothing I do changes this, gets generalized far past the situation that taught it, into areas of life where action would actually work, which means the illusion of control isn't the dangerous state in this story. Total, accurate helplessness is. Sit with that, because it only gets stranger from here. Take crosswalk buttons. In New York City alone, something like 9 out of 10 of the pedestrian buttons you press don't do anything. Roughly 1,000 of them across the city are wired to nothing, connected to nothing, and yet people press them, wait. And when the light eventually changes on its own fixed timer, they walk across the street fully convinced their thumb made that happen. Office thermostats are worse. HVAC technicians have estimated that in some buildings, up to 9 in 10 thermostat dials are disconnected fakes, installed specifically so employees stop calling facilities to complain about the temperature. You are quite literally adjusting a dial connected to nothing and feeling better afterward. Not because the room got warmer, because you did something about it. None of these systems are lying to you maliciously, by the way. Nobody designed the crosswalk button as a trick. It's just that once engineers noticed people calmed down after pressing something, they realized they didn't need to fix the wiring. They just needed to leave the button there. Now point that at your own life, because this isn't just a story about buttons and lottery tickets. Think about the last time you refreshed an app you'd already checked 90 seconds earlier. Nothing had changed. You knew, on some level, that nothing had changed, and you did it anyway, because some part of you has convinced itself that checking is a form of doing. It isn't. Checking your phone dozens of times a day doesn't make anything happen faster. It just makes you feel like a participant in your own life instead of a bystander in it, which, and this is the uncomfortable bit, is exactly the trade Langer's office workers made when they picked their lottery card. You are not more informed. You're just more soothed. Think about how you argue online. You type out a reply to a stranger you will never meet about a topic you will not change their mind on, and some part of you genuinely believes this comment, this one, is the one that tips the scale. It won't. Statistically, it almost never does. But hitting post gives you the same chemical hit that picking your own lottery number gave those office workers in 1975, the illusion that your input mattered in a system that was, in most cases, indifferent to it from the start. And look at how you talk about your own effort at work. You tell yourself the promotion, the raise, the good review, all came down to how hard you worked. And sometimes it did. But you almost never credit the manager who happened to be in a good mood that quarter, the reorg nobody saw coming, the client who liked your voice on a call for reasons that had nothing to do with your spreadsheet. Crediting all of it to your own effort feels better than admitting a huge chunk of your career outcomes were decided by things you couldn't see and never controlled, so you don't. You quietly rewrite the story so you're the main character with the steering wheel, instead of a passenger who occasionally taps the dashboard. Watch what you do before something you actually can't control. The pre-flight ritual. The lucky shirt on game day. The specific way you knock on wood immediately without deciding to. The second someone says the word you weren't supposed to jinx. None of these rituals have ever once changed a flight's turbulence or a game's outcome. You know that, and you do them anyway because the ritual was never there to change the outcome. It's there to change how it feels to wait for one. Here's where this gets almost uncomfortably personal. Think about the last bad thing that happened to you that truly had nothing to do with your choices. A diagnosis, a layoff, a relationship that ended for reasons that were never really explainable. Now think about how fast you went looking for the thing you did wrong, the sign you missed, the warning you ignored, the version of events where it was somehow, technically, your fault. That search was never really about the truth. It was about control. A world where you caused the bad thing is a world you can prevent from happening again. A world where it just happened randomly to you for no reason at all. That's the version your brain will fight hardest to avoid believing, even when it's the correct one. Now here's where this gets complicated, because if the illusion of control is just your brain lying to you, the obvious move is to stop believing the lie, right? Just see things as they really are. Except in 1979, two researchers, Lauren Alloy and Lynn Abramson, published a study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology that makes that advice a lot more complicated than it sounds. They sat people in front of a button and a green light and asked them to judge how much control pressing the button actually had over whether the light turned on. In some rounds, the button did nothing. In others, it had a real but partial effect. Then they compared two groups, people who scored as clinically non-depressed and people who scored as mildly depressed. The non-depressed group did exactly what you'd expect after everything you just heard. They overestimated their control, sometimes by a wide margin, even in rounds where the button was connected to nothing. But the mildly depressed group didn't. Their estimates of their own control lined up almost exactly with the actual measured contingency. They weren't fooling themselves. By the numbers, they were more accurate than the people who were supposedly mentally healthier than them. I have to be honest with you about something here. This finding, sometimes called depressive realism, did not hold up perfectly. Later, larger attempts to repeat Alloy and Abramson's experiment got messier, noisier results. Some replications found the effect, some didn't, and the debate about how real it is continues in psychology departments right now. But even the weakened version of this finding points at something worth sitting with. Total accuracy about how little control you actually have is not obviously the healthy outcome. The people who function best in daily life are not the ones with the clearest picture of their own powerlessness. They're the ones who maintain a slightly inflated sense of agency and, crucially, don't notice they're doing it. Which means the goal was never to eliminate the illusion. That was the wrong target the entire time. The actual question, the one nobody puts on a motivational poster, is which illusions are cheap enough to keep and which ones are quietly costing you the one life you get. And this is exactly the switch modern platforms figured out how to flip on command. Every dashboard you've ever opened, your fitness app, your investing app, your step count, your sleep score, is engineered around the same trick Langer's lottery cards used by accident. Give a person a number they can watch move, a button they can press, a metric that looks like it responds to their input, and they will happily mistake movement for meaning. Some trading apps have been even more direct about it. A few platforms used to trigger celebratory animations, confetti falling across the screen every time a user completed a trade, regardless of whether that trade made money. The confetti carried zero information about whether the decision had been a good one. It existed for exactly one reason: to make an inherently uncertain, largely unpredictable action feel like a skillful, controlled win. The same emotional trick as choosing your own lottery number instead of taking a random one. Regulators eventually pushed back on designs like this, specifically because they encourage more frequent, riskier trading, which tells you the illusion of control isn't just comforting. When someone else profits from your trades, it's also expensive. Wearables run the same play with a health halo attached. Your smartwatch hands you a single number every morning, a readiness score, a recovery percentage, a sleep grade, built from your heart rate and movement overnight. And you treat that number like a verdict on how the day is going to go. Adjust your sheets, dim your alarm, shift your bedtime by 11 minutes, and the number moves a little the next morning, and you feel, for a second, like you're steering your own biology. Some of that is real, but most of what shifts that score night to night is variables the device isn't even measuring. Stress you didn't log, a meal you didn't track, 100 inputs the algorithm has no access to. The score is precise looking enough and responsive enough to your tiny interventions that it borrows the exact same trick as a self-picked lottery ticket. It turns something mostly outside your control into something that feels like a skill you're improving. Then there's the feed itself, the actual algorithm. You believe you're curating it, following certain accounts, unfollowing others, tapping not interested on things you don't like. And to a small extent, you are. But the platform is also running thousands of tests on you that you'll never see. And the version of your feed you experience is a negotiation between your choices and a system optimizing for a completely different goal: keeping you there. As of last year, the average American was checking their phone somewhere around 200 times a day. Close to once every 5 minutes, they were awake. That is not a habit anyone consciously chose. That is a system that learned exactly how much illusion of control keeps the thumb moving. And here's the question worth sitting with. And how much of your daily digital life is actually you exercising control? And how much of it is a beautifully designed crosswalk button? Because the companies building these systems have read the same research you just heard. They know exactly what a sense of agency does to how long you stay, how much you spend, and how good you feel about a platform that structurally does not need you to succeed. It just needs you to keep believing you might. So here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to tell you to accept that you have no control, because that isn't true, and it isn't even the point. Some of your control is real. Most of what happens to you today will, in fact, be shaped by decisions you make in the next few hours. The problem was never that you believe in your own agency. The problem is that you've never once in your entire life sorted out which parts of that belief are load-bearing and which parts are a crosswalk button. So do this today, once, honestly. Pick one thing you check, refresh, adjust, or repeat because it makes you feel like you're doing something. Your phone, your inbox, your workout tracker, the thermostat you keep nudging even though the room never actually changes temperature. And just stop. Not forever. Just once. Notice what happens in your chest in the 10 seconds after you stop. That discomfort, that itch to go back and press it again, is not anxiety about the outcome. The outcome was never affected by your button pressing in the first place. That discomfort is what it feels like when the illusion gets interrupted mid-performance, and you're forced to sit, briefly, in the actual amount of control you have, which is less than you think and more than you'll admit on your worst days. Do it for one day, not one lifetime. You're not trying to prove a philosophical point to yourself. You're trying to feel, once, the difference between the control that's actually yours and the control that was only ever a costume it was wearing. You are not going to eliminate this, and you shouldn't try. The people with the clearest, most accurate view of how little control they actually have are not thriving. They're some of the loneliest, most exhausted people in every study on this topic. The goal was never a world with no illusions. The goal is choosing your illusions the way Langer's office workers chose their lottery cards, on purpose, eyes open, knowing exactly what you're doing and why it helps. One last thing, and then I'll let you go press whatever button you are going to press anyway. Somewhere between the crosswalk and the inbox and the workout app, you built an entire identity out of buttons that don't do anything. The uncomfortable question isn't whether you'll keep pressing them. You will. It's whether you'll ever admit, even once, which ones you already know are broken.